Welcome. I'm Andy Carlson, and you're listening to the Time with Tim podcast. Each episode, we explore the impact of complex trauma through the personal journeys of our guests. Along the way, we'll connect with experts and individuals who share their unique perspectives, insights, and practical tools to help you on your healing journey. Let's take this time to learn together. Welcome back to Time with Tim. I'm Andy Carlson, joined by Tim Fletcher, and we're continuing our series of conversations with Jenna Miscavige. In our past discussions, we've explored the impacts of growing up in an environment of coercive control. And so, Jenna, as you've had a little bit of time to process our last conversation, have any new insights or questions come up for you?
Yes, definitely. I've been thinking about many things, and I've even asked other people, just like, okay, do you have anything you want me to ask? But things that I hadn't, I wish I should have posted something, but anyways, I have more than enough. So, but it was good to get some other people's input too after watching the first one. So I guess one big question I had, I'm just looking at my notes are right there, but I'm trying to figure out how to word this in a way that doesn't sound like rude, but I guess it's about the nature of trauma and what it is, because when I say this is going to make it sound like I think that I'm better than people, but I don't. That's not what I'm saying. But it's like there have been people in their lives who have, it feels to me, who have had like every opportunity where, they have been able to go to school, they grew up in a home with their families, and they don't necessarily they don't say that they were abused. And yet, like objectively, I feel like they have sort of wound up where they are maybe like very heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol, and maybe like have even wound up in prison. And anyways, for something that they actually did. I guess I'm trying to understand, like, what is it about trauma that makes it trauma? Like, is it the cumulative things that happen to you? Or is it how you look at the things that happen to you? And like sometimes, like, I guess when I see situations like that, and by the way, like there's so many people have gone through so much worse things than I ever have that are doing much better than me too. Like, and I'm like, gosh, is this because I'm like thinking of myself as a victim? Or sorry, I'm trying to just like, I know this is like a lot to pile on as far as the question, but I'm just like, what is it that makes it trauma? Or is that even the thing,
No, it's a wonderful question, and I get asked it all the time. So I think to start with, Jenna, it's important to make a distinction between traumatic event and trauma. So we tend to think of a traumatic event that's a trauma, but no, it's what that traumatic event does to a person that determines whether they end up with trauma or not. So if you ever seen an animal that's in a scary situation, so all of a sudden they run, so they get kind of the flight response, they flee, so their brain has released cortisol to give them that extra energy. Then as soon as they relax and they're safe, so they're out of the traumatic event back to safety, they usually shudder, take a deep breath, and then relax. The trauma is resolved. So the traumatic event is resolved. So they don't end up with trauma because they got through the traumatic event. So what creates trauma in a person is when they can't resolve that traumatic event. So their nervous system then is in a state of overwhelm because they can't solve the problem. They can't escape the problem. They can't fight or flight. So they're in this state of overwhelm, their stress system that they can't resolve. That then creates a psyche injury. Internal, that's the trauma. So it's trauma is what happens in you as a result of what's happening outside of you. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So then does it follow that like you could have certain mental processes that would make you just more what's the word, susceptible to trauma just because of how you think, and it's not so I guess I guess on one hand you're totally saying that if you're able to get away, obviously that's better, because like meaning if someone is doing something bad to you and you're able to escape, then it's not a recurring thing where you're unable to escape.
Right. Or a child in a home where they're having like some problems, but they have very nurturing, loving, caring parents that give them tools and support, then they can resolve that problem. It was a painful event, but it didn't create trauma because their parents helped them resolve it by finding solutions to it. So let me take it further because I think I see where you're going. So most people, sadly, when they think of trauma, just think of kind of horrific events, so abuse, etc. And so that definitely is a form of trauma. So we call it big T trauma, but it's only a small percentage of what is actually creates trauma. The bigger cause of trauma in people is what we call little t trauma, which is invisible trauma. It's neglect trauma. So big T trauma is something horrific happening to you. Little t trauma is something good that should have happened to you but didn't.
Right. Yeah.
So a child's needs weren't met. A child wasn't accepted. A child wasn't nurtured. A child wasn't allowed to be human and develop their personality. So that invisible trauma is over 80% of people have that because
that
of stuff. And
then, who doesn't?
Yeah. So if you think of what we saw with interoception in our podcast, that vagus nerve that is picking up vibes. So a child that knows mom and dad don't care, they're distant, they're angry, they're anxious, they're stressed out. I can't connect with them. They're not safe. Well, all of a sudden they're picking up, this is overwhelming. I need to connect. What do I do? What do I do? So they're being traumatized just by picking up vibes that mom and dad are stressed out, overwhelmed, angry, or there's tension in the home all the time. So all of that creates this overwhelming sense to the child, and they feel all alone. So there's usually always an abandonment piece that goes with that, because why is nobody helping me out? And then there's always the shame element. That must be then my fault. So what we know with little t trauma is there is a group of personalities that is more susceptible to it, and it's sensitive children. They pick up on things and it affects them deeper because of their sensitive heart, their sensitive nature. And so to be neglected, to have dad get a little upset with them, to have mom get flustered, that's extra scary for them. That's extra dangerous for them. So we know that about 75-80% of people with little t trauma were sensitive children.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So when you look at kind of trauma, there's so many different factors. So it's big T, little t. Types of little t can be neglect, but it also can be you pick up mom and dad are stressed and angry, whatever. And then you got your own personality and then your own ways of naturally kind of where you go to cope. Do you go to flight? Do you go to fight? Do you go to shut down and freeze, escape to a fantasy world? So you develop all your ways of coping with that kind of based on your personality. What you see in the home is what is the natural thing to do. And so that's where some people, if you look at 90% of people in jail, they have complex trauma. You look at 90% of homeless people, complex trauma. 97% of people with addictions, complex trauma.
And wouldn't it be
And
like 100% of the homeless people though? Like,
probably, but
are
we
there?
gotta
They
be
might
safe.
just choose. Okay.
Um, but so we look at those and we go, oh yeah, we can clearly identify that that's kind of a negative social element,
Mhm.
addiction, incarceration, homelessness. But then you look at the workaholic, then you look at the people pleaser. Well, that's just as a maladaptive, a coping thing, but we validate it as a society.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
messes up relationships just as much as other stuff, but there's not a stigma that the others have.
Right. It's like rewarded.
Yeah. And so we've basically defined that there's over 85 different ways that people have learned to cope with trauma and their maladaptations. And so, yeah, one is addiction. One is kind of your negative stigma stuff. But then there's all the ones that have been validated by society, but they're just as damaging to healthy adult relationships. And so it's so important for people to realize that, like, I might appear to be coping well and I might even appear to be quite successful, but that doesn't mean I'm not having trouble with intimate relationships. I'm not having trouble in my own personal mental health because I've got the maladaptations from childhood. The other thing to me that's so important to realize is that when people hear big T trauma and little t trauma, they tend to think that big T trauma, horrific events, is worse than little t trauma. So they go, oh, the kid that was sexually abused, the kid that was physically abused, oh, they had it so much worse than me. I just was neglected by my dad because he was a workaholic.
Mm-hmm.
The key is that little t trauma is probably even more damaging than big T. The effect on the nervous system is the child's still overwhelmed.
It's more constant rather than
Yeah,
in a
it
minute.
takes its toll
Mm.
gradually over time and sends this powerful, powerful message that you're not good enough. Nobody cares about you. You're kind of a zero. And so what we begin to realize is that little t trauma is just as powerful as big T trauma, though it doesn't appear on the surface to be, but it is.
Yeah, that makes sense because I guess most things that would cause little t trauma are things that would be more habitual. Like a freak accident is like, in some ways, of course, it's horrible, but in some ways, and of course, there could be like really lasting side effects, but your mind maybe can go like, okay, that happened once, and
Right.
also I'm sure it can also not do that.
Yeah.
But but where I guess
So
the
if you think of
nature.
a child who they've got years of generations of, let's say, a very British family where you just didn't hug.
I hear that all the time. It's like I had an English mom. I'm like,
Exactly. And so they go, how can that be trauma? But to a sensitive kid that needs that physical nurturing and hugging, that's a loud statement that nobody cares about you. We're not going to meet your needs and so what you have to realize, it's not just kind of what mom and dad did on purpose. It's often what mom and dad did as a generational pattern of how families operated.
right, yeah. Like maybe didn't even know that they weren't doing it because that's how it always was for them.
Exactly. That's the way they were raised. So why are you complaining?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But could it still be that it is also, well, okay, well, we talk about like sensitive kids, and then I'm like, okay, but do people become sensitive because of trauma? But then when I think of me and like my ex-husband, like it's very clear that I experience things like much worse than him and also much better. Like like things that are amazing and beautiful. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited. And he's like, that's cool. and then also I'll be like, oh my God, it's horrible. He's like, we'll be fine. I'm like, so, but I don't, but I on some level, I used to tell myself which is actually kind of condescending, but I was like, he's just like stuffing down his emotions into a hole. But, and also like, I don't know if that's true.
So to me, you're getting onto a very important distinction that needs to be made. And it's the difference between emotional regulation that's healthy and emotional stuffing that's unhealthy. So a child that's allowed to be fully human is going to express all their emotions, but their parents are going to teach them emotional intelligence, which is how to express emotions appropriately for the situation so that they don't hurt others. And so you learn to manage your emotions and express them well. And then if you get triggered, you learn, okay, I'm going to express a big emotion, but I'm going to regulate it quickly and get back into a safe zone. So emotional regulation is just the tools, the skills needed to be fully emotional, but to manage and express emotions wisely and lovingly. What happens in complex trauma is a child comes in authentic and expresses their emotions, and they get punished for it. They get shamed for it. They get told they're bad. And so they have to start stuffing, which means they got to repress all of their emotions, because to show emotions makes you weak. To show emotions gets you in trouble. And so you just try not to feel, and emotions become messy. But what they don't realize is they think they're just suppressing their negative emotions, but they're really suppressing all of their emotions. So now they don't have this capacity to enjoy stuff and just go, wow, that's beautiful. I just want to dance here. And no, they got to keep everything always under control. So our little minds as a child, we have to then justify to ourselves that we're doing the right thing. So a person that suppresses their emotion, they justify it by go, I'm under control. Look at that person over there that's expressing they're so out of control. It's embarrassing. I'm under control. I'm cool under fire. And they have all of these ways to rationalize it. Whereas the other person, then they go, no, but I'm a free spirit. I let everything hang out. No, everybody knows where I'm at. And they justify that freedom of expression, but they could be quite dysregulated at times that they're trying to justify that. And so it's getting past our own justifications to go, both of them have a healthy element. The stuffer is trying to regulate, but they don't know how, so they just stuff.
Right.
The free spirit is trying to be fully emotional, but they don't know how to regulate well either. And at times it gets dysregulated. And so there's a blend of healthy and unhealthy.
Yeah. And I guess everyone can take it away. Like maybe some people can be more free spirited, but act out more. Like, and then some people just keep it between here, and then, yeah, that's really interesting. And another thing that you said was that, like, when you're talking about people who would see other people being free and having fun and they sort of like criticize them. And I've seen that a lot, like when people are like dancing on the dance floor, like people, or even just like being in a group of people where they kind of all they do is like talk crap about other people. And like, I'm not against sometimes talking crap about people. I'm a human, but like if that's all you do, like even I, who am not always the nicest person in the world, I'm like, okay, like why are we doing this? Like this isn't really fun. And I think it is so accurate when you say that it's like almost like this insecurity inside of you that like wants to be more free or wants to be able to do that, but you sort of like look down on it, or you make yourself like, I don't know, like be disgusted by it or something. But maybe that's more of a reflection about how you feel about yourself when you do that, or if you were to like be more free.
And that's where I think, so it comes back to that shame thing, that internally, deep down, I believe I'm not good enough and I got to hide the true me, because if people see the real me, they're going to reject me. And so I basically reject the real me myself. And so there's part of me that wants to let the real me out because it's in there and I feel it. But as soon as I go to do it, fear takes over. What will others think, etc. And so what comes out of that for many people is they put high value on I'm under control. I'm disciplined. I've always got, I'm not impulsive. I've always think stuff through, blah, blah, blah. But really, so there's a healthy element of being disciplined and under control, but that can also be something I hide behind because of shame. So
Yeah.
I'm only going to let you see a very small part of me that's always under control. I'm not going to let you see all of my emotional world because to me that would be out of control. That would be embarrassing and you would reject me if you saw that. And so you really narrow your personality to almost robotic.
Yes. Yeah, I can totally see that. And I actually feel it myself sometimes because like sometimes if I'm speaking publicly or even when I would first started doing videos on YouTube, in order to talk coherently, there was and you know what? I would do it in Scientology too when they would do interrogations and you would be on the e-meter, which is their version of a lie detector. And like in order to not have like I feel like it's not supposed to like feel your heart rate or something. I don't know what even it does, but it like I would have to like moderate my feelings. Like I would just be like, ah, and so I would like, and so it's almost like a drug that your body
Yes.
releases into your system that makes you calm, and it makes me calm. But also, I noticed when I was trying to do, YouTube videos that when I would like do this thing that I naturally do in order to speak coherently, I also became very boring and like didn't have a lot of energy and wasn't like smiling or using my hands, which not, like I don't care about the appearing boring part. Like I wasn't myself. Like, and I normally like, you know, like I realized like I was like when I compare it to how I talk to my friends, usually I'm like, oh my God, you know
Yes.
what? In the
Yes.
videos, I was like, blah, 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 blah. And so it like makes it so it works both ways.
So can I ask this? So I've had many clients who they got high praise from bosses, from fellow employees, all of that for being cool under pressure. So when everything's hitting the fan, they're the one person that's in the zone, that's calm, that knows exactly what to do, kind of your ER nurse that just is calm under pressure, ice in their veins, all of that. And they get great validation and awards for all of that stuff. But for many, that's a trauma response. So the first response in overwhelm is you go to cortisol, which is fight, flight, extra energy, go, 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 go. But then the second response, if that's not working, is you go to opioids in your blood system. And that calms you down and puts you in the zone.
Yeah, I
So,
can feel it.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
some kids can actually, once they've learned the mechanism that kicks off the opioids, they can actually bring that on when they're facing a situation so that they get themselves into that calm state, which is to me
Yeah.
sounding like what you do.
Yeah, I totally do that. Except I need to be not calm in order to
Yeah,
start it off. Like I
exactly.
need to start feel like I've heard of people taking like beta blockers before I don't even know what's in a beta blocker or even exactly what it is, but before they do like public speaking, and I almost feel like that's what I'm doing, but to myself
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah. So your central nervous system is picking up that stress is building. And so part of it's wanting to go to adrenaline to give you extra energy, but you're able to quickly bypass that and go to the opioid side and go to the calming.
Yeah, that's so interesting because even if I try to use it, if I'm like in an argument with someone though, it's like I also become brain dead.
Yes.
Like I forget everything they say right after they say it.
So
And
yeah.
so it
So
doesn't help because I can't have a conversation because I'm like, I don't know, like my mind is like, it's not
we call
somewhere
it
else, but it's
brain
just like,
fog.
yeah.
Yeah. So some people in the initial part of kind of going to that calm state, it's like their thinking gets sharper. They have less distractions. They're able to hyper focus. They're really in the zone. They're in the flow. But for many, it progresses to all of a sudden, like your brain is shutting down and you
Yeah.
can't remember stuff. You can't think of words. You can't follow a conversation after a while
Yeah.
because the opioids are kind of reaping their effect on you.
Yeah. That's interesting. That makes sense. But it's almost like sometimes it's a state that I put myself into rather than being angry too. Like it's like, I'm like, oh, I know that I'll do damage if I'm angry. And so I'm going to try to calm down. And I'm like, I deserve an award for this because I'm being calm.
If I'm putting together kind of your story correctly, like to me, what was valued very highly in Scientology was people who were under control,
Mm-hmm.
who
Right.
were happy and calm.
Compliant.
Yeah, compliant, kind of always in the good mood, in the calm state, didn't get ruffled very easily, all of that stuff. And so when you grow up with that as a child, you kind of realize, okay, that's a valued thing that's going to get me validation if I do that. So I need to learn how to do that. And so if in your early times when you get legitimately angry when you should have because you were hurt or something was unfair or somebody lied to you, whatever, and you got punished for that, you quickly realize, don't go to anger anymore. That doesn't turn out to any good results. So I feel anger building. Let's switch to calm. And you develop the internal pathways to do that. So then it goes from anger to, okay, I feel sadness building. Let's switch to calm. I feel tension building. Let's switch to calm. All of those things you develop, all kinds of different things that trigger that mechanism inside of you so that you go to, so it's really a dissociative state. So how do I get out of this present reality and get to this calm state where I can be kind of physically in the reality, but not emotionally in the reality?
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I was never really like I guess compared to everyone else in Scientology, I was never particularly good at it. Like I feel like they would constantly say that I was not compliant, and they have this word backflash, like it's an unnecessary response to an order, and I really didn't even think I was doing it, but apparently they did think that. So I feel like if they were listening to this, they'd be like, she's compliant, but I was like compared to how my children are, certainly compliant. Just
So-
maybe, yeah.
So can I ask you this? Like I can see you being that to a certain degree with authorities, but you probably had an internal sense of how far you could push the envelope before you needed to stop. So you could kind of rebel or backflash a little bit, but you couldn't go too far. You kind of knew where
Right.
to draw the line
Of
internally.
course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's with authorities. With your friends, though, to me, you would be much more, I want to have peace and harmony.
Yes, totally.
So
Yeah.
you would take the skills that
Mhm.
were actually being taught to you
Mhm.
to be compliant, to be happy, to be all of that, and you transferred that to your friendship group.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I naturally was that way. Like I don't want to
Right,
fight with
exactly.
people. Yeah, yeah, and I really like people a lot in general.
So if I can take that farther, so to me, with your friends, so as soon as you feel safe, you
Mhm.
want to go to harmonious relationships. You want to have love as the kind of the predominant thing that's happening, which will lead to positive emotions and validation, etc.
Mhm.
But, and so I think you did that. So that's a very healthy piece.
Mhm.
But the challenge to me, and this, I'm going to ask you this, would be if you feel tension building with your friends, if you feel it's heading towards anger or conflict,
Mm.
did you switch to, oh, I got to be calm?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So this was a really good point. I never thought of it in this way, but what my ex-husband would say is that you go in with people and you're like their best friend all of a sudden, and I'm like, everything's great. And then I actually noticed this recently in my, it seems like separate things, but it's not really, like in my relationship where I don't communicate if I'm sad because I'm like, so I will be fine. And then I will be like, I'll get sad about something, but I don't say it because I'm like, no, that's embarrassing. That's pathetic. I don't even think that, but I'm like, no, it's fine. I can deal with that. Like that's normal. Like I deal with that all the time. And then I don't do anything for a long time. And I put up with a lot, like, and in this case, I'm referring to friendships too, because now I just made it sound like I put up with a lot in my relationship, but I just mean like I will shove things kind of down, even though I don't really think of myself as somebody who shoved things down, but it's really not even necessarily something they did. It's like that they did that I never said anything about or never clarified. And then it will build, and then I never say anything about it until I'm angry. And when I actually feel like I have no choice but to say anything about it. And a lot of times I'll be like, huh? What just happened? Like I thought we were fine this whole time. And then all of a sudden you're angry, and then it will be a problem. And I guess I think of sadness as, I don't actually, like, I never would say this about myself because I don't think it's pathetic when somebody else is sad at all.
Right. Exactly.
At all. But when I am, I'm like, ew, like, what am I going to be like? I don't know. Like, it's kind of really mean to myself a little bit. Or I'm like, or I see it as no big deal for me to just be like, okay, well, they didn't mean it like that. But then another thing happens, and then another thing happens, and I'm starting to be like, and it just like, yeah, it builds up.
So let me see if I can explain it this way and see if it resonates with your experience. So a child growing up in complex trauma, they've got the authority figures in their life that aren't meeting their needs, that are being abusive, controlling, all of those things. So there's part of them that's rebelling against that, but needing to be compliant to a certain degree. So they're living in that world, but then they got their friend world that's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're happy there. They're enjoying it there. They're equals. It's a really positive thing. But what do they do when there's conflict? What do they do when somebody hurts their feelings? What do they do when they disagree with somebody or they don't like something that's happening? Well, they've never been taught in the other world the tools to handle that. So they don't have the tools to handle being hurt and being conflict. So what do? Well, they adopt the tools of their unhealthy world, which is put on a mask, suppress your feelings, just be happy. Without even realizing it, they're adopting the tools out of the world they're rebelling against because those are the only tools available. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
But then what you also realize is that you've also adopted some beliefs from that world that you've actually partly rejected.
Yes, that's what I get so confused about. So
they don't allow you to show all your emotions.
Yeah.
You can only show one emotion. But now with your friends, you're not allowing yourself to show all your emotions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you get sad, you look down on yourself just like they would look down on you in the adult world. If you were sad, you now do it to yourself.
Yeah.
Nobody else is doing it, but you've carried over the belief system of that world without even realizing it. Does that make sense?
Yes, that totally makes sense. That's so true. And it's weird how many things converge into this same thing. Like, part of it is me, like how we've talked about before, like not really knowing when I'm at a 6 or a 5. And it's like, so it goes from like a 1 to 10 when like I'm just not used to paying attention to sadness because I'm like, oh, shove that down. And then there's what I do with it because I don't have the practice, like what we just talked about. So I'm adopting from this other system. And then there's also, which of course is behind everything, there's like the self-worth aspect of it, where it's like, well, I'm not going to say anything about that because I'll be fine, where it's like, and I actually have gotten better at this one part of it in friendships, but not obviously, well, not in relationships, because I didn't notice it until this week, to be honest. And because I got divorced, so there was nowhere else to notice it, which is funny how it's just, you learn it differently in different places. But with friendships, like I was friendly with people, but I would never be like, I need your help. Like, I'm not okay. I would never do that. I would want to so bad. And what's weird is I would do that even when I was like, well, not really even when I was a kid, but I don't know. It was something like after, as an adult, I was just like, but then I don't know, in the last year or so, like I kind of forced, like I kind of had no choice. And the way that some of my friends have like stepped up for me, like honestly, I don't even know how these people are such good people. Like they're like angels from heaven. And it is like made me feel so much more secure in this world. It has made me feel so much gratitude, because I'm like my best friend, I'm like, this woman is like, she's there for me all the freaking time. How is she so smart and so wise? And how come I only used it this year? So it's like almost like I was denying myself this wonderful gift this entire time, because I was like, I didn't want to be too much to ask for help.
So if I can expand that and come at it from kind of a big picture lens and then zoom in on it. So if we go back to that shame belief that a child has, so often a child, if they had a need, mom and dad were always too busy. Mom and dad
Oh, for
rolled
sure.
their eyes, or they kind of
We're not even
communicated
there.
that you're a
Yeah.
burden.
Yeah.
And so the child feels like a burden. And so what they
Yeah.
begin to realize is, to have a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
I can never be a burden.
That's totally how it was. It was like, there's this thing in Scientology called developed traffic. And it's basically all the ways where you can be inefficient. And there's this long list that we would have to learn by heart, which I've only recently just forgotten. But it's like all these ways where you are literally a pain in the ass. And now, like, some ex-Scientologists uses it as a joke. Like, we're like, yeah, you're just Dev T, like developed traffic. And it's like, that's how we were treated as children. Like, and there were all these rules, like, you couldn't get food after a certain time, or you really can't ask questions. You should just look at policies, and you shouldn't try to clarify things, because if policies are interpreted verbally, then it's not right. And there was just like, even if we needed a new uniform, we would have to like write. There was so much bureaucracy. We would have to write a purchase order. We'd have to get 3 quotes for it. Was so they made it so hard to get anything you needed that it was just like, I'm not even going to ask. This is not worth it at all.
So if you take that a bit further, like, to me, that it's one of the 85 characteristics of complex trauma, that you're afraid to be a burden or a pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that anybody, if I'm a burden to anybody, then they're going to reject me as just too much work, too much.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge fear of ever being too much. But what then has to happen with that is a couple of things. I have to become self-sufficient. And if you're quite capable and smart, then you can do a pretty good job of that and actually kind of pride yourself on, I'm so self-sufficient.
Yeah, and I suck at that. I'm not good at it.
Okay. Or then is, I have to bottle up all my emotions, all my needs. I got to suppress, because if other people sense I'm not doing well, or I'm sad, or I'm struggling, they're going to get tired of me and dump me. So I gotta start keeping secrets from people. I got to kind of hide a whole bunch of stuff. And so you develop kind of that whole mentality, but it's all based on the belief that for a relationship to work, I got to be the strong one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm equal or not, or the weaker one, it's never going to work. I'm going to get rejected every time.
Yeah, because I won't be adding value.
Exactly. So I always have to be the strong one, which you set yourself up then that I can't be human. I can't have needs. I can't be honest. Well, how can that lead to a healthy relationship?
Yeah, and for love to feel transactional, where it's like if
Exactly.
I'm not giving you exactly how much you're giving me, then yeah, oh my God, that is in Scientology they have like what's called the 4 conditions of exchange. And there's like poor exchange, fair exchange, and good exchange or something. There's exchange and abundance. And they basically teach you that if you and on some level, some of these things are true. That's how people get trapped into Scientology. But then as a kid, they basically teach you that if you receive anything for free, including food, water, a bed, then you have to pay it back by working, or else they teach you that you're going to become a criminal, like literally a criminal, because only criminals get things for free. So anytime, still, anybody gives me something, like even when I get a gift from my mom and dad or something, I instantly have this like anxiety where I'm like, it's like I almost get frustrated by it because I'm like, now I owe. And so it's like I always have to give a gift of equal value.
Yes.
And it's always, so everything is just transactional. Like even with my friends, and I have way overused some of them at this point, but and I'm having to really get over it. Like
Yes.
where I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to give them equal time, but I feel horrible right now, and I don't know. But it's stuck in my mind. Like I can't let it go, and it's almost like you don't deserve anything
So
on your own.
two things to that. So number one, that's a shame-based culture. So that a healthy relationship, we aim at 50-50, but it's never on any given day 50-50. So to go purely transactional is always dangerous. Shame-based culture, though, is I give gifts to you, I show love to you to obligate you to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a way of gaining power over you. It's not true love anymore. It's you now owe me.
Yeah.
And so that then
and I get
sets up
suspicious sometimes if people are
exactly.
too giving. Like
So
I'm like,
that's yeah. So when we were first married, we had a couple come to visit us, and they brought us a gift, and then we thank you very much. And so we got asked a couple months later to go to their house for supper, and my wife's just panicking. We got to take a gift, and I said, no, we don't. Oh, yes, we do. And I go, no, we don't. And I'm not going to fall into that if you give me something I now owe you. No. So I kind of purposely put my foot down, and she was freaking out because in her home, it was that very much that way. But it was just interesting to me to see the power of that thinking in my wife's mind that, well, they gave a gift, we owe them now.
totally.
So, yeah. So the second thing, though, is to me, I rather doubt that with your children, when you were raising them as little children, you didn't keep a notebook and a checklist of what they now
take
owed you.
everything. They just take it.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, this transactional thing just got thrown out the window when it comes to parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Yes. And what's interesting is that, well, I guess maybe this is like a teeny tiny bit of a tangent, but one thing I noticed too is that, because I was thinking about friendships recently, that it's like people think that like I guess when I give something to someone, I actually get something from it. And people don't love you because of what you give to them. Actually, sometimes they love you more because of what they give to you. Like it's actually funny, like it's like almost like a little investment. Like they can even, I don't know, like they're more invested in you. Now this sounds like I'm really manipulative, but like yeah, it's not just what you give to people. It's like they also get something from giving to you too. And that's how it works.
Exactly. And that's why I think, to me, when people live by I never want to be a burden, they actually miss out on, sometimes my need is actually giving another person an opportunity to do something for me that's going to result in huge blessing in their life by doing
Yeah.
that. And I'm
Yeah. And
kind
even
of
be like,
taking that
oh,
away.
have confidence, like, oh, I'm a good friend.
Yeah. And then the other piece to me is, if I'm always the strong one, have I ever thought about what my friends are feeling as always kind of being the ones that I'm helping all the time?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
they're probably feeling like they're a burden. They're getting to be wondering what I'm thinking of them, because I never seem to have any needs. I always have my act together, blah, blah, blah. And so they're feeling there's an inequality here, and the giving goes one way, but I can't give back to them. And that's affecting our intimacy, our ability to connect at kind of deeper levels of struggle and sharing, because they never have problems. They never open up about that stuff. So there's something missing that's blocking a deeper connection.
Yes. Yeah. That's so true. It makes so much sense. It's like you're depriving them of also the intimacy as well. It's almost something I have to actively let go of every time, but it's also so crazy that I didn't know that I was missing that. Like it's like this huge like thing that makes you feel so good about the world around you in order to be able to receive from people without being like, okay, now I'm obliged to.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what is the challenge of little t trauma. So a child is not getting what they should be getting, but they don't know that.
Yeah. Right.
To them, that's their normal.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't know that they're kind of being traumatized. And so that then they go into adult relationships and they don't know that that's how relationships should work. That's how things should happen, because that wasn't part of their growing up experience. And so they don't know what they're missing out on.
Yeah. Right. It's true. Yeah. And I feel like it's harder for people who know what they're missing out on. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it appears harder at the time, but they don't suffer more long-term effects.
I think for those that know that they're missing what they're missing out on, they're consciously experience more pain. The person that's missing out on but doesn't know it, they're experiencing same amount of pain. It's just at a subconscious level.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I've been thinking about that lately because sometimes when people there's different people that share their Scientology stories, and sometimes like when they talk about them, and like sometimes I like cry a little bit, but they'll be like very, very much like bawling and like, or even like shouting and all this stuff. And I'm kind of like, is there something wrong with me that I don't feel? Like, I almost am like, is this a performance? But I don't think that it is, because it's like, I mean, they're not like an actor or something. But like when I talk about certain things, especially since I didn't experience any different. So I'm like literally pretending every day like my childhood wasn't normal when I didn't experience anything different. So I don't really have anything to compare it to other than my kid or what everyone says happened in the world. But that's their world. That's not my world. What happened to me is the only thing I really know. And yes, I know a little bit from my kids, but I don't know it inside my soul as part of my core memories. And so like when I talk about it, I feel honest, not in a conversation like this, because I'm not just telling a story, but I swear I feel overwhelming boredom, like painful drudgery boredom, like, and so they're getting really like upset about it, and I'm like, are they crazy or am I crazy? Like,
You're defining to me what's a really important aspect for people to understand in recovery. And so part of what we're doing in recovery from trauma is you're helping people reconnect their memories of the details to the emotions of those memories. And so they're getting integrated again. But everybody does that differently. Everybody doesn't do it at the same speed or over the same amount of time. And so some can go very quickly to, they reconnect to the emotions of the little child. They're not kind of adult regulated emotions that come from a more objective place. They're back to that was so unfair, that was so wrong. And so there's a predominant anger, sadness that comes out. And that's fine. They need to vent that. They need to get that out and validate it and allow themselves to experience. Whereas others, they're still at, they process their memories just by talking about it. They don't feel a ton of emotions around it. It's more telling a story, a narrative that they've told many times. It's getting to be boring to them. And so it's easy for them to look at all the very emotional people, go, that looks like a bit fake to me, but it could be very real. And it's easy for those people to look at you and go, boy, she's shut down. I wonder if she's even dealt with her trauma because
Yes.
she's not feeling anything.
And I see that people thinking that about each other in the community. Where they're like, that person is not acting in this way. They're shoving it down and they're like, whoa, that person is really still stuck in it. And it's like, I wonder what's actually going on, you know?
So what I saw early on in my counseling career was couples that would come to me who both had gone through a loss. So I think early on I had a couple that lost a child. And so what really stood out to me was that everybody grieves differently. And so that's why over 75% of marriages end up in divorce after they've lost a child, because the husband grieves very differently from the wife. And the one says, you're not doing it right. You must not care as much about this child. And they get very angry at each other, and you're not supporting me enough and all of that. And you're getting over it too quickly. And I still want to grieve. And it just causes more and more fights and tension, and they break up. And so
I can imagine,
what becomes important to realize is that neither one was right or wrong. It's just they're different. And because of their personality, because of how they process emotions, they process thoughts, everybody's a bit different. And so when it comes to dealing with trauma, some start with very much, they deal by venting emotions. Others deal by, I got to talk about it.
Yeah, but I have a question though, because in my life right now, if there's something going on, I cry all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I cry all the time. I'm not I'm not like that. I'm not stoic at all. I think that's the last word that people would use to describe me. And I am kind of dramatic, maybe a little bit. I don't know. But so it's not so it's not like that's how I process my emotions now. It's just about the past things that I'm like, I feel bored.
So let me give you a couple options with that. So the one option is Jenna hasn't dealt with anything and she's still repressing it. And so some would want to conclude that. And I don't see that about you. The second would be Jenna processes some of her stuff, especially in the past, through a very kind of verbal academic, whereas she processes more in the present in an emotional expressiveness. And so part of why you would say that is a possibility is because in the past you weren't allowed to express emotions. So you had to learn as a child to deal with stuff by talking it through and keeping your emotions regulated. So now when you talk about the past, your brain switches to that way of processing. Does that make sense?
That's really true. That's completely true, because if we thought there was an injustice or something, we're supposed to write a report, but or if we're talking about something that happens, it was very much you're supposed to write time, place, form, and event, and you're not supposed to add your human emotion and reaction. Yeah, and so I could see that that's me processing it in that way. And also I think that I have this other layer where my real problem is I want to be listened to and I want to be believed like I never was. And I feel like if I get to a state where I don't want to call anyone else's state overly emotional, because it's not. They're not doing anything. They're not hurting anybody. They're not lying. But I feel like I won't be heard. And that's more of my bigger fear than anything else.
So what would come out of your Scientology background would be that emotional people are irrational. It's calm in your brain thinking people that people hear and listen to and respect. So you got indoctrinated with that. And so your brain goes back to that if I get too emotional, everybody's going to write me off as crazy. Nobody's going to listen to me. I got to be calm. But with certain friends where I feel very safe, I can let my emotions out and express them. So to me, there's a part where probably when you process your past, you switch back to that more verbal approach than you would in the present. The third option is for a person that's done a lot of healing, they don't need to go back through all the emotions. They've already done that. Now when people ask them about it, yeah, they can talk about it, but it's not a big sensational story anymore because they've worked through the healing process, and they're at a different place. So they're a lot of the people that are the very emotional are still in that very early raw place where they're just beginning to start the healing journey, and this is what's coming out. But when you're several years down the road and you've done a lot of healing already, you don't have the same emotional reactions when you talk about that stuff. And so that's where I would see part of where you're at as well.
I think that's a really good point. I actually feel like it's a little bit of all of those things. I mean, I don't really think of myself as somebody who shoves down my emotion, but I can see that sometimes I do. But like when I wrote my book, before I wrote my book, I had like lots of things I didn't remember at all. Like large portions of my life when I was in Scientology, I was like, I don't even remember. I don't remember dates. I don't remember anything. And then when I wrote my book and I like really put my thought to, oh, I remember this. And then I would ask my parents, I would be like, do you remember this? And they'd be like, oh yeah, this happened, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, the things I remember actually happened. And then by the time I was done with it, I did go through a lot when I was writing it, but by the time I was done with it, I had this feeling of, oh, now I understand why I did the things I did and why I feel the way I feel. Like it was like, oh, I understand myself. Like, because there would be certain things like I'd be like, oh, I felt bad about doing that, or oh my God, I really acted crazy here. And then when I look back, I'm like, oh my God, like, of course. Like what other options were there? And I remember everything now. Like I remember so much from being a kid. I remember the order of things. I remember my schedule when I was a kid. Like I remember everything.
If you look at a child who's kind of in this overwhelmed state, so 90% of what's happening is painful and they can't resolve any of it, so it's just piling up more and more pain. Well, the brain has to go to kind of more extreme ways to try to protect the child from being totally destroyed by the pain. So one of the things he does is just starts to kind of block memory.
Yeah.
So if you don't remember this, it can't hurt you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to block this memory. And so that's where people get to adult life and they've got kind of years of memory gaps or just a whole bunch of parts of their memory they can't remember.
Yeah,
but
or
then
if I
when
like
it
ask
starts,
my parents, I'm like, they're like, I don't remember. I'm like, oh, how convenient. They don't remember anything.
Exactly. But once you start to heal, then that stuff can start coming back. And then once it starts coming back, you go, oh, so that's why I get that emotion. Oh, that's why that I felt that way. And so it starts connecting the facts and details of what happened with the emotions that have been there that you haven't been quite able to explain why you go through what you go through. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems accurate to how I feel, because I don't feel like I'm repressing things. I just feel like I've really thought about it a lot, and I have felt many things regarding it, and now I'm kind of like objective, where I'm like, interesting, and Yeah. But I wonder if certain people, depending on their personality, if they experience things differently. Like, for example, I wonder if the reason why I feel exceedingly bored when I talk about it is because even though my parents weren't around, and I realized I was lucky in this way where some people weren't, and other people were lucky in ways that I weren't. But my parents weren't around, but I hugged my friends all the time. Like I hugged other people. I can't imagine being somebody who hasn't had hugs. And other people who experience Scientology in a different like level of the organization, they will be like, my mom never hugged me. When I saw my parents, they hugged me. And I didn't think that they didn't like me. I thought that their love was conditional, but I hugged my friends all the time. Like there was no, like honestly, I have a hugging problem. Like I can't stop hugging. That's how I am. And like, so, but I felt like exceedingly bored when I was there. Like everything was like do labor, listen to L. Ron Hubbard speak on and on. I was like, this is not fun at all. Like I just thought the whole thing was like there was nothing to look forward to when I was
Right.
there.
Right.
So I think I may have experienced it as extreme boredom. It's sort of like how I feel when people talk about the military. Like I'm like, there's nothing there for me.
Right.
Not because
Yeah.
the military's bad, but like because it's like I don't know, guy stuff. Like it doesn't, or it's like if there's a movie that has only men in it and no women and no good interior design or pretty art things, like that's how it feels. Because I think that may have been how I experienced it.
So two things with that. So I have 3 siblings,
Mm-hmm.
and so we got together for a family reunion a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what stood out to me is that, boy, did we grow up in 4 different homes? Because we all have very different memories of what childhood was like. And I think if you were to talk to all your friends who were with you in Scientology and they all wrote a book, it'd be quite interesting. That probably be quite different books.
Yes.
And so we all experience stuff differently based on a whole bunch of different factors. But the second thing about you being bored, if you look at kind of the educational school system of the US and Canada or the West, the big trouble has always been what to do with active boys who don't like to sit and read a book or listen to a teacher. And it's because boys, though, like boys, girls included, there's different learning styles. So some are very auditory, visual, others are hands-on. They need to be doing stuff. That's how they learn. That's how they experience life.
Totally.
So to sit them in a classroom and say, sit still and pay attention, that bores them to death. There's nothing that gives stimulation from that because it goes against their natural learning style. And so I think
totally
for
see
you to be in kind of Scientology and their learning style that that didn't match your learning style.
No, it was horrible. And they were trying to teach us the answers to life before we even had experienced life.
Exactly. And
So it was
weren't even asking those questions.
No, exactly. It was like for adults. And it was like the reality was that Scientology was my only real problem at that point. It really wasn't anything else. And then a lot of it was just like listening to this, like at the time as like a 7, 8, 9-year-old listening to this 60-something-year-old man who was kind of delusional in his lectures and making jokes about a world which I had never experienced because he was in the regular world. It was like we kept having to look up the meanings of words in dictionaries, but I just had no context. And so I was trying to understand this thing. I was like, I do not care. I just did. It was so boring. Yeah. But I totally see what you mean about kids in school because when I would volunteer in my kids' classes, it was like, there would be kids who would be trouble, but there was nothing wrong with those kids. There was nothing. It was very obvious that there was not a single thing wrong with them. It's just that that wasn't like that way of learning, sitting there being dictated to. Like, I mean,
Exactly.
I would get bored too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much interest plays a role because because I've been thinking about ADHD lately and how is it like a trauma response or is it a real thing or is it both? And um me and my son tend to be really similar in that we're really interest driven. Like if something like really speaks to us, then we can't stop our curiosity. Like we're
Exactly.
gonna learn how to
Exactly.
I mean, the things that he talks about. He has a new interest every day, and he'll be like waiting for me, like, so now today we're gonna talk about this. And we go down the same like rabbit holes, except lately his has been about weird stuff. Like I won't even say like anyways, like medieval tools and like squirrel meat and stuff. I don't know. It's like so he learned that one of the presidents of the United States, their favorite meal was squirrel meat or something. Anyways, but he does really well in school. Always has, without trying, but it's only because he's exceedingly interested in things. Like, and I don't know why he's like that because yeah, on things that he's not interested in, like such as cleaning his room, he clearly has no interest in that. He's terrible at it. But or cleaning anything for that matter. But if he's interested in something, he will dedicate himself. And so, yeah, that could just be a personality thing that's even genetic. That,
Very much. Very much.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think to me, one of the challenges of parenting is learning my child's learning style
yeah,
and then kind of adapting what I do with them so that they get kind of maximum learning. So I had a couple kids that hated going to school. They were bored to death, but get them doing something that was of interest to them and
they
hands
loved
on,
it.
they would learn and they became masters of it. And it was just, okay, that's our culture doesn't fit their learning style, but we can create a home life that facilitates that learning style.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like I instinctively knew that with my son because they would send him home with like pages and pages of homework. And I'd be like, we're not doing it. Like, we're
Exactly.
not doing it. He was at school for 8 hours today. Like, we're not doing it. And the teacher was like, okay, that's fine. As long as you read to him every night, which I was like, yeah, we can
Yeah,
listen to Harry Potter or read Harry Potter together. Like, my pleasure. And then it was like, he he did well. And I didn't want to make him hate learning. Like
exactly.
that's what was
Exactly.
really important to me. It's like what a gift learning is. So now I'm not gonna make him a little kid learn outside of school, um, and make him
Exactly.
hate it.
Yeah. And that's where I think as parents, you go, what kind of things capture their curiosity? So, what kind of things make them curious? Well, I want to nurture that.
Yeah.
And then you got a lot of growth and learning happening.
I know like okay, so I feel like that touches on a little bit of um ADHD because well one thing I noticed in my son that he does a lot is he would do well in his class, but whenever the teacher would call on him to ask him a question and I was there and they'd be trying to like show him off to me how good he was doing, but he always was like, huh? I don't know. He wasn't paying attention at all. He was daydreaming. And that's what I would do all the time. But I made it look like I was working, but I wasn't. I was daydreaming because I was trying to escape this most boring place in the entire universe. And now sometimes I feel like it affects me in that it's hard to concentrate on doing things that I have to do rather than things that interest me. And I mean, that can affect my livelihood. It can affect, like, I mean, I haven't done my taxes yet. I haven't done, like, I'm supposed to install something for insurance. And it's like, but it's really starting to affect me badly, where it's like almost hard to force myself to do things that I know I have to do. I have no choice. Like, I'm an adult. And it's like, I don't know. It's like, it's becoming bad.
So let me see if I can give you a bunch of stuff around this, Jenna, because it's really become, I think, a hot debate topic, which is ADHD. So what causes ADHD? And I think ADHD gets diagnosed for a whole bunch of different things that aren't actually ADHD. Um, so Albert Einstein, I guess, was a terrible student because he was a genius, and whatever they were talking about just bored him to death, and his mind was everywhere else.
Yeah.
And so you
I
get
knew that
diagnosed
was my
with,
problem.
exactly, you're a genius. Or you get a child that school doesn't match their learning style, so they get fidgety and they get diagnosed with ADHD. No, it's the school's fault for not matching the learning to what the kid would gravitate to.
Yeah.
But it can be a trauma response where the kid's system is overwhelmed stress-wise because dad was drunk last night, dad beat up mom last night, dad got angry at me last night. And so that trauma response is, I can't be in the present. It's too hard to deal with. So I'm bouncing all over because I got so much going on in my brain that I can't focus.
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Overwhelming. So that's a trauma response. And then another one is the child that they did have the shot of cortisol, but it didn't get resolved. So it's still in their body. And so now they can't sit still. They've got all this energy to burn because of what happened that's gave the shot of cortisol and adrenaline that was there. So that can be a trauma response. And so,
well, that makes sense.
So I think there's been a lot of people fighting unnecessarily just because they try to lump ADHD as being all one. It's got to be one thing only. And I go, no, it can be all kinds of different things that get diagnosed as ADHD that look like ADHD, but it's not necessarily ADHD. And so it's just important to realize we're not branding every hyper kid or active kid as ADHD. It could be wrong learning situation. They're a genius. There's trauma. There's a whole bunch of energy because of cortisol. Like all of that looks like ADHD.
That makes sense. And honestly, it's obviously true. Like, meaning just like having seen different kids in the classroom, if you work with them individually, and obviously I haven't dealt with every single kind of kid, but if you work with them individually or on something in a way that they're interested in it, or try to make them interested in it, or they feel like maybe they work better with someone. I worked better with someone as a kid, and we weren't allowed to. So I would always find loopholes and rules that I could use in my favor to always work with someone. Because
and I think that's to me a key thing that often gets misdiagnosed as ADHD is a child needs to feel a connection to a safe person to be able to relax. So often when they go to do something, they want to first make sure there's a connection. Then they can,
you're standing guard.
Then they can get focused. Then they can kind of buckle down and do it. But if they don't feel connected, there's an anxiety and an antsiness that settles in because now I got to be on guard. Nobody's there for me. And so that connection piece is massive for behind what gets diagnosed as ADHD for people, attachment-based stuff.
But then, like, as an adult, you're sort of not, well, I guess I'm not needing to escape anything, although kind of I am. There's bills and tax stuff, and but it's like your learned behavior. But I guess like what would help with that? Is it like mindfulness? It like strengthens a muscle that you never had to strengthen, or do you just never check your mail in case there's bills in there, or do you?
So let me give you one other part that gets diagnosed as ADHD. So it's a child. So every child lives out of their limbic brain. So their limbic brain is their emotion brain. That's the only part of the child's got a brain stem in the limbic brain. The cortex is in development. And that's the adult, mature thinking brain. So how does the limbic brain make decisions? If I feel like it, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mommy, can we get a new puppy? I'll walk it every day. I'll feed it every day. I'll clean up its poop. Well, that's great for the first week. And, oh, do I have to? I don't feel like it, Mommy. And so every decision is made not by a commitment or by what's healthy, but it's based on, do I feel like it or not? Am I bored? Is this going to be fun? Is this going to give me instant rewards that are pleasurable? If not, I don't want to do it. So a child living in their limbic brain, they can start to look like ADHD because they just bounce from one thing to another that's going to give them instant gratification. They can't settle down and do stuff that's a bit boring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so part of parenting is I got to help my child move from being controlled by their limbic brain to being controlled by their cortex. So they become consistent. You can rely on them. They're going to do the right thing that's healthy every day, whether they feel like it or not. They're not just going to make decisions based on, do they feel like it or not? So for children coming out of complex trauma, often they get to adult life and they're still partly controlled by their limbic brain and partly controlled by their cortex, especially when it comes to the least desirable, enjoyable things in life. Cleaning the house, doing my taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I can be quite disciplined in everything else, but those procrastinate because my limbic brain, that's boring. I don't feel like it.
Yeah. I mean, when you
And
clean stuff, all you see is more dirt. I'm just saying.
so it's part of, to me, recovery for people coming out of complex trauma is working with their limbic brain and still training it that, hey, I got to do the right stuff, whether I feel like it or not. That I might not be totally there yet, but that's the goal that I'm working towards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that I will be consistent and disciplined and get stuff done on time and kind of meet my responsibilities properly and not just bounce around based on how I'm feeling on any given day.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I do feel like I do that a lot. But then I've tried like different systems to like discipline or manage myself where I'm like, okay, I do a little bit of this and then for 15 minutes and then I'll do this. And then I'll do something I like.
Yep.
And sometimes it
helps.
works. And
That helps. What I would encourage, just from what you've said, is like, to me, part of what gets a child to their cortex from their limbic brain is connecting to somebody who's in their cortex. So if I feel connection to somebody who's regulated, to somebody that is disciplined, to somebody that's there for me, that I know is going to walk beside me and encourage me, okay, I can get into my cortex and do what I know I need to do. So connection becomes an important piece often in managing that limbic brain.
And that makes a lot of sense with what I was trying to do with my studies as a kid.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what you said before. Oh, okay.
So that might mean you have to express some needs to friends once in a while.
Yeah,
It'd be a
and
burden.
yeah, and what's so funny is that like I know what my son needs to clean his room is for me to go in there and to be like to start out with making it fun.
Exactly.
And like just be chit-chatting while we're doing it.
Exactly.
And then he'll be into it. Like I know it instinctively. I know it because that's what I need to clean my room too.
Exactly.
So that's so interesting.
So I think, to me, what's come out of a lot of parenting from 50 years ago is the emphasis was on discipline, consistency, doing the right thing, not on connection. What we're realizing now is connection is actually the higher need in a child. And when a child feels connection, often the discipline and all of that naturally follows. So if you try to create a disciplined child without connection, you will either get a very rigid, black and white, regimented person or a rebellious person.
Yes. Okay.
So just your son's crying for connection. And once
Yeah,
he's
he'll
got the
become
connection,
rebellious. He's not going to become, I already know what he's going to do.
but once he's got connection, then yeah, I'll get down and do the work.
Yeah, totally. Okay, that's so funny. That makes a lot of sense. And because we're the same, like, and I already know that. I know we're not the same in every way, but we're the same in that way. Meanwhile, my daughter's room is spick and span all the time. She's like lives with bums, and she's like, "Oh my God." That makes a lot of sense. Okay. That's also the person that I want to be rather than be a disciplinarian. Because I'm horrible at that anyways.
Yeah, and I think like what I try to teach people all the time is so much emphasis was put on parents need to enforce boundaries with children and be that disciplinarian. And what I say is that's partly true, but if there's not connection and the child's needs aren't being met, then they're going to rebel against the boundaries. But if you're meeting their needs and connecting with them,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to go along with the boundaries because they know it's for their best. They have the connection piece first and they feel loved. So basically their love cup's got to be full. Then the boundaries are not an issue. But if their love cup's empty and all of a sudden there's more rules, I don't like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's completely true. Wow. It's funny how I had these all as different things that I wanted to talk about, but they're all related to each other, but I don't know it
You
until we
dig
talk
in.
about it. Yeah.
So do you have anything else or can I ask you a question?
I mean, I have a list, but no, I'm to the point where I would have to look what else is on the list. So
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, what I was just thinking of earlier this week was if you could summarize what were the three most painful parts of growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, it could be a big T one-time event trauma, or it could be the slow accumulation of small repeated things that took their toll on you emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just like a physical type of pain thing. It's a gradual building emotional overwhelm, rejection, hurt, abandonment stuff. Would you be able to kind of summarize what you would classify as the three main sources of pain or trauma for you?
Um, well, I'm not sure if I would be wording it, but some things sound worse than other things. But the one that I feel was the worst for me was well, a big one was when Scientology is very hierarchical. And so if you're like at a higher level, you're not allowed to be friendly or fraternize with people at a lower level. And many people who are my friends were at a lower level. We had grown up together, and it was like, or I would be, and so I was always in trouble for being friendly with people. And there's always guilt associated with like literally just being with my friends who I needed because I was never with my parents. And then I would be sort of moved from location to location and I would never see those friends again. So like to me, the part that I feel the worst about, or that I still have a like sadness about, is not seeing my friends anymore, the times when I was ripped away from my friends, the times when I was not allowed to talk to them, and yeah, that sort of thing.
So if I can summarize that just in light of what we were just talking about, like to me, you're not going to fully understand Jenna Miscavige unless you understand the number one priority in her life was connection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So all of her greatest wounds come from the breaking of connection.
Yeah, that's completely true. Yeah.
And I think most children are like that, but most have not come to the awareness that that's what
Well,
the
I
real
didn't until you
deep
just
issue.
said it. But it's true. Yeah, like just when you said that, that's actually because I'm like, why do I even want to be on YouTube? But it's like, it's that connection. I don't need YouTube for that, but I actually like the idea of talking to other people, meeting new people. And it's actually one of the things, because in some ways, in ways that people don't understand, leaving Scientology is just as traumatizing as being in Scientology. It's like you lose everyone who you ever knew, all of the network you ever had. And that doesn't mean Scientology is so great and that's why I miss it so much. It's like, no, I loved all those people and they're gone. And
so if I can just speak to that, Jenna, it's because it's an important piece in understanding complex trauma.
mm-hmm.
So healthy life is all about connection to healthy people. And so we understand that if we lose healthy people, then we're going to grieve, you're going to feel a lot of pain. But if you had an unhealthy person in your life, you'd be quick to want to leave them and you wouldn't feel any pain. But complex trauma, it just messes everything up. So if the only relationships you have are with unhealthy people within an unhealthy system, and that's all you know,
mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden that's taken away from you, well, there's an element now of trauma and pain there that doesn't even make sense to some people, because it's like, well, you should be happy to be out of there. Like you should be running as far as you can, celebrating being, but that's all I knew. That was my whole support system. So that's where complex trauma just gets like, wow, that's muddled. That's really complicated, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, it totally is. But I think interestingly enough, like to a lot of the executives there, and like I don't miss them at all. Like and I'll be honest, like my family members, I don't care. I mean I just don't. I only care about my friends because my family was like a fake thing when I was there. And so it is something I say because I think that I don't want to say regular people, but that would be really hard for them to not. And when I was a little kid, it was hard for me. But when I was a little kid, but then it was like, no, I really just felt that I missed my friends because they were my family. And so I think this actually kind of takes it circle back to what we started with, which was how can different people, like how could just say, this isn't exactly what we said, but it's like, how can people have the same thing happen to them, but different people take away different things? Or maybe objectively somebody has had worse things happen to them than somebody else, but the other person's more traumatized. I lived in a certain way at a boarding school where I didn't see my parents, and I was with my friends. It was very regulated. And there's other people who had a different experience in Scientology where they were with their parents, but their parents were really abusive towards them. And then I never looked at it this way, but the fact that I got to be around all those kids when they were, okay, they didn't have to do manual labor. They didn't have to do things like that, but they were not around kids. They just worked in a place where they had to do certain work. Like I always thought like, okay, I had it worse, but I actually didn't. Like they didn't even get to have friends of their own age. Like, so that's a huge deal. And it's like, it may be looked at a certain way, like, oh, it's worse for your parents. But no, the part that hurts me the worst is not seeing those friends. And those people maybe haven't experienced that love and camaraderie in the way that I was maybe actually more rich in than maybe other people are in their life. Like maybe because a lot of bad things happen in Scientology, but if I'm only looking at it through like I have some superpowers because of it, and it's not because of Scientology, it's just because of growing up in a different way. And so it is actually, it might look worse on me, but actually when it comes down to it, some of those things that those other people went through, like I would prefer my situation over theirs.
Yes. So again, in hearing your story and reading your book, to me, there were three mitigating factors to your
Mm-hmm.
Scientology upbringing. So number
Mm-hmm.
one, though your mom and dad were very absent, when they were with you, they still tried to be fairly loving parents to you.
Right.
And I think that definitely was a mitigating factor. Then you had a really good group of friends,
Mm-hmm.
and that was definitely a huge mitigating factor because there you truly could connect. You truly could be
Yeah.
authentic. But
And I
then you
always did. I always had like a group
exactly.
of friends that were like everywhere I went.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think you always had one or two staff people amidst all of the other staff people, but there was always one or two that were just kind of good souls that did care about you. And so there was, it wasn't like everybody in authority was bad. There was a few that actually cared about Jenna, and that was a mitigating factor. And so, like, in some ways, that I think helped you get through that. It was doing its damage by being in that, but yet you were managing it. You were getting through it. You were experiencing getting a lot of your needs met through some of those things. And that prevented you from going to an extreme forms of coping, I guess, that were maladaptive.
That makes sense. It's true because I still derive pleasure from thinking of certain things and people, and it's not all bad. Like if you think about it, it's like, yeah, that's terrible that happened. That's illegal. It's not slave labor is not cool, but it actually makes sense. Like there were things that were mitigating about it, you know?
So that was number one of the painful stuff. You got a second one? Or did number one sum up everything?
I mean, I don't know if this is something that is painful, but it feels like, I guess some of it feels like a missed opportunity, a big missed opportunity, like as far as like not having the education, not having, even though I had friends, and so maybe it's just part of it. It's like we didn't really have freedom to like see our, like maybe more than other people did though in Scientology to see our real true selves, but we didn't really get to go anywhere or do anything or have free time where we could just like play or like just enjoy ourselves and like so and then I don't know if this is in the same category, but it's like it was always like we just always wore uniforms. We were always sort of the same. So I guess it's more like about individuality suppression. That's a
I
big one for me.
yeah, I agree. Like to me, there's a huge so the first big Jenna Miscavige need is connection. The second one is authenticity. There's this little girl that just wants to come out and be genuine. Um, so to me, based on what you said, there's an important piece to understanding complex trauma and healing from complex trauma. And that is when we think of losses, we normally think of something that we had and then lost it. So we had a relationship, we had a pet, we had a possession, and then we lost it, and then we grieved. Complex trauma, again, flips it. And basically, I lost something I never had but should have had.
Yeah.
And so I
Right.
should have had playtime, but I never got it. So I didn't lose playtime, but I did lose playtime. And that's a huge loss. And so what you begin to realize is that kids from complex trauma have hundreds of losses of things they never had but should have had. And so there's an element of grieving that has to happen over the childhood I wish I had, but never got.
Yeah, exactly. And it sorry. I was going to say something that I swear was really interesting, but the thing is that when I left Scientology, I was almost 22. It's like I had to go straight to work. Like it wasn't, I didn't have it's not like I could just like chill out for years or whatever. I was like, no, I need to support myself. And then I had a kid a few years later, like, I mean, not very long after too. And so it was just like, there wasn't time for that. There wasn't time to like, I don't know, when I think about people going to college or people just like going to regular school and all this stuff, it was like you're
Yeah,
instantly
so
back into serving others kind of
exactly.
immediately.
So another piece in understanding complex trauma for many, it's you kind of skip over your childhood and have to become an adult, even
Yeah.
when you are a child.
Yeah.
You got to act grown up. You got to be responsible. You can't do teenage things. That's worldly. That's bad. You can't just relax and take time off and travel and decide what you want to do with your life. You got to be this responsible adult from the get-go. So there's a huge amount of sense of loss that I never got the time or the space to be a child or to naturally develop. I was forced to kind of skip 20 years of development and go from here to here in one day, and I got ripped off.
Right, exactly. Yes. And yeah, that's exactly how it feels sometimes. And interestingly enough, that feeling is what actually a little bit drives me because I think I'm a little bit angry about it.
Oh yeah.
I think and I notice like just like as far as like activism or spreading the word about what like the evils of Scientology, what they did, what it was like growing up there. That's the part of it. Well, I'm actually a little bit of a poor activist, and I was actually going to ask you about this if I'm not a little bit angry.
And what I would say to that is, so when you look at how does the brain and the nervous system process deep hurt or deep loss, it goes through a process. So we go through usually kind of a numb state first, like it's too much to take in, so I just feel numb about it. And then I tend to go to either deep anger, deep depression, sadness, mourning, crying. Then I sometimes go to a feeling of hopelessness and despair. But there's always this anger stage because that was wrong. That shouldn't happen to a kid. That's unfair. I should be angry about it. And so if I see somebody who's going through processing a hurt or a loss and they don't go through a time of anger, I don't think they're being totally honest about what they lost because they need to go through that. The danger is for some people, they kind of like the anger stage.
Mm-hmm.
And they get stuck there.
Yeah.
And now it turns into this resentment and it fuels them, but it keeps them a bitter, negative person.
Right, right.
And that then becomes a negative in their life.
Totally. And I've completely seen that. And also I've been there too. Also. But I wonder if is it like healthy to, because I actually don't feel like it controls my whole life. I think at one point it did when I first started talking about Scientology. And now it doesn't. It's almost like I almost am like, okay, I need to be a little bit more angry about this because it's horrible. Like it's actually really bad. And if I am just, but, and it comes in waves, but maybe it's not bad to be angry as long as it's not all consuming, as long as it's directed, because anger is like an inciting thing. And it is something that maybe I have a chance to do something about more than other people. And regardless of that, it's something that I want to do something about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how I would explain that, Jenna, would be we tend to think of anger only in the limbic brain, this very intense emotion. But the reality of there's also a type of anger that settles into our cortex as a commitment. I'm going to fight injustice in this area. I don't need that fuel of ongoing getting stirred up and angry. I just have this settled commitment that this is wrong and I'm going to fight against it. And that's kind of a settled into a healthy anger that now gives me a direction.
Yes. I feel like that's what I have a little
Yes.
bit, is what you're saying right now, because I'm not, I actually feel like I try to be pretty balanced about it. Like I'm not like, and other people are less balanced about it, and that's fine because they're sometimes better at one thing than I am. But I feel like I kind of tell the truth about Scientology, what it was like, but I also, my concentration is on healing, because
Exactly.
that's what I missed out on, and that's what I'm trying to get back. Like the things that I missed out on, that's what I'm trying to get back now. And in the end, the pain that Scientology does is, the only thing bad about Scientology is what it takes away from you. You know? So if I'm going to keep taking those things away from myself in order to fight Scientology, that's
Exactly.
not healthy.
Exactly.
So
So a lot of people, when they first come into healing and begin to realize kind of how they were hurt, they get to that angry stage and they direct all their energy into speaking against the evil, fighting the evil. And that feels good, but it takes the focus outside of themselves. It puts the problem all external and doesn't face the fact that, hey, I got messed up in the process and I need to direct some energy into my healing, or else I'm just going to be fighting for the rest of my life and I'll never enjoy the beauty of peace and love. And that's where I really want to end up. So it's finding the balance between, I still got to live in a world and fight the injustices, but I still got to take care of myself, and I got to figure out how to keep that in balance.
totally, yes. And it's almost easy to just go fight that thing and desert yourself, because that's what you're used to doing.
Exactly.
And you're also like, you on some level are trained to feel like you're valueless if you're not a martyr.
Exactly.
And like,
And you get validation for it, and it gives you energy. And
it's so true. And sometimes there's things that, like, somebody who is not in Scientology, or people might validate you for, which is awesome. They appreciate your bravery and whatever. But like, also maybe there might be a level of it that they don't know that you're repeating similar things, because, and it's nobody's responsibility other than your own, but it does get validated. It's like workaholism, it does get validated, but it's like a slippery slope, and you have to be your first priority, because you are not anybody else's priority in this world. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been trying to figure out, like being an activist but also being healthy, because it's obviously like can be triggering, but it can be, and that's part of life. You're going to get triggered, but it's like sort of having the balance of triggers. I guess I have to teach them as an opportunity to learn and to improve myself, rather than like something that's going to be my downfall, because nobody's going to live a life without triggers. That's like impossible. So it's like, yeah, maybe this like balance of, yeah, maybe when I feel like doing the thing that's a little bit that I know is going to be triggering, then I can address that when I'm ready and I'm strong enough and I have the wherewithal to dig that up. But then if the rest of the time I'm talking about healing, which frankly is more important in my opinion, then, which also can be triggering, but I don't know, it seems like more like a daily health thing, like eating well, like mindfulness, like then that's kind of the balance that I feel like, is sustainable for me to strike. And I know I feel like it seems like I'm just talking about my channel, but I'm really, this is what I want to do with my life. And it allows me to have connection and do something which I think is even more important than exposing Scientology, which I'm going to do while I'm doing it anyways, which is just like, I don't know, like healing, and along with other people who are there who need it, because we all We all need it. That's why anybody even cares about Scientology stories, because everybody can relate to it in some way. Everybody.
Exactly. So if you take your two big wound issues, authenticity and connection,
Mm-hmm.
well, everybody with complex trauma can relate to that. They don't have to be in Scientology. So all of a sudden, your platform just went from helping people in Scientology to a much bigger platform of helping people who struggle with connection, who struggle with being authentic. And you relate, you get it. You've been there.
Yes. Yes. And it helps me.
Exactly.
It's so true. And it's just, that's what I've completely found to be the case. Like, I've met so many wonderful, kind people just talking about this. Like, everyone can relate. It's that thing that brings people together is like just being vulnerable. It takes people off of their guard. They're not competing with you. It's like just an openness and it gives people permission to be themselves.
Exactly. Exactly. Connection and authenticity.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting near the end here. Andy, did you have any comments? You've silently nodded your head today, and we didn't even give you a chance to participate. So,
Sorry, Andy.
No, no. What I love here is you kind of wrapped up with two of the comments I was going to make, at least, and was going to be asking about your healing journey and what's next on your healing journey. And I think you touched on something that was really important here at the end. As you shared your story coming from this institutionalized religion, like I really connect with it coming from a family that shared a lot of similar patterns. And um, as we can like find that connection through our common pains, there's a there's two psychologists that came up with mindful self-compassion. And so as we learn how to develop self-compassion for ourselves, they had four key components, and I can never remember all four of the components. But one of them is it's finding that common humanity.
Mm.
And
You
so kind of
mentioned this when
rather
we
than
first spoke.
yeah. So rather than like necessarily kind of comparing or finding our differences, it's like here are these components of your story that just like really resonate with me. Because a lot of times in shame we're like isolated, or we think it's, I'm alone, it was just me.
It's
And
so
so
true.
through that vulnerability and authenticity that you've shared, like I think a lot of people and like we can find our common humanity with each other, which helps to create that connection. And it's like this core for building that compassion for ourselves.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so
I
true.
don't
Yeah.
yeah. Two of the other four things. One is kindness,
Mm.
and the other one is mindfulness. And I can never
Mm.
remember what the fourth one is on the list.
We'll have to put it in the comments.
Yeah.
We'll put a disclaimer across the screen. No, but like I feel like the things that you just mentioned, it's like almost like otherness is a big problem, that it causes so many problems in the world, and even just like trying to put labels on people or whatever, and or how we're all kind of like standoffish and like, but like finding the common humanity is just where we can all improve, and it's how you make connection. And I actually feel like I've realized today, like, honestly, connection is the most important thing in the world to me. Like, and I think it always has been my whole life. I just never knew it.
yeah,
It's
and I
like I
think,
crave it.
yeah, and to me, ever since meeting you and hearing your story, it was this little girl that was constantly seeking connection. And thankfully, you had friends that you could connect with. Because I think if you didn't have that, if you had been one of those kids in Scientology that were sent off to work by yourself,
Yeah,
it would have destroyed you.
I think you're right. Yeah. And that's interesting. Like, that just it gives me clarity about certain things too. Like, because even though things were hard, like I am okay. Like, I did turn out okay,
Mm.
and honestly, I should be grateful for that, because I could have had it a lot worse.
Yeah, and I would say what came out of that for you is this strong desire for connection or attachment, but when you do attach, then you have an insecure attachment.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. Yeah. I'm afraid of losing it because I'm used to it always being threatened and taken
Exactly.
away. And that's like it's like my biggest driving force.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. And so that's what you have to deal with in your ongoing journey, because that's what triggers you, is that insecure attachment part.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. That's like threatening the thing that's most important to me. And I never put that together. It's so weird how all these like little buzzwords that are said, it's like disassociation and mindfulness are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, or like how connection and like fear of abandonment are opposite ends, but you don't always see how they go together when it's all just like kind of obvious, I guess, when I talk to you.
Well, that's my job. But, well, I just want to say again, Jenna, you've been an absolute joy to have on this. And this is our last time for this session. And I really hope that down the road we get a chance to interact with you again and
Me
kind
too.
of
I know we will. We're
see where you're
connected.
at on your journey and all of that. But like I said before, to me, what's been great is just your openness and your wanting to grow, your vulnerability, being willing to look at yourself, process through it, and you just want to get an accurate picture. You don't want to hang on to distorted pictures and
Right.
lies. It's like, no, I want to see the truth. I want to really get it.
Mm.
But I don't want to just understand my past. I want to keep growing in my present so that I can be the mom to my kids that they need, so that I can have healthy, intimate relationships. And I think you've always been, like, to me, such a key piece in understanding what's got you through is you've always had some good friends. At every stage in your life, you've always had a couple good friends. And I think to me, that's been, you didn't have your parents as your rock all the time, but you always had a couple friends as your rock. And that's made all the difference for you.
It totally has. Like, honestly, yes, you saying that is like I feel rich in that. And like, actually, I'm incredibly lucky. And it's not because of me, it's because of
Exactly.
the amazing, beautiful people that I have in my life who have given so much to me, like, who are just the sweetest. Like, oh my God, why am I this lucky? And that's actually like an amazing thing to realize, an amazing thing to make sure that I don't squander by my own issues, that I just like, but also work through with compassion, because I could potentially ruin things that are like, have always been the greatest blessings I have. And when we put it like this, it's like, I am like seriously rich in friendship if only I can accept it. Like, I have so many opportunities that I'm holding myself back from, with so many wonderful people, that's actually really wonderful.
Yeah. So if I can just final statement say this, if you look at our culture today and we define what makes a person rich, it's possessions, money, influence, power. And we've really missed as a culture that what makes us rich is connection to a couple key safe people. When you look at Scientology, what makes you rich? Well, the last thing was connection.
Yeah, it's like power.
So it was an inverted riches scale. But thankfully, within those two cultural systems, you found the true thing that makes a person rich and experienced it. And I think that's probably one of your greatest blessings. So
It's so true. Yeah, I love that. That's so clarifying for so many things. Thank you. You guys are wonderful. I really, really honestly appreciate this opportunity so much. Like, it's just another thing that I honestly feel rich for having in my life. I'm so grateful.
very good. Andy,
Yeah.
did you want to have any closing comments?
Yeah, I do. I just want to turn that back to you. It's been so valuable, and I think you've offered so much just through your authenticity. It's
Thank
it's a
you.
very generous act of yours to be authentic and vulnerable to others. And I do you mentioned your book and your YouTube channel, and so that's just something that I want to reference here as we end. And so your book is called Beyond Belief: My Secret Life Inside Scientology and My Harrowing Escape. And your YouTube channel is Jenna Miscavige. And I think Tim and I both read the book. We thought it was wonderful. Very
Thank
very
you.
good read. And
Thank
so
you for remembering the
thanks so
long
much.
name
Yeah,
because I
I
can't.
know. I just want to say Beyond Belief, but I look, there's a lot more, many more books that just
It's
have the first
really
two
long.
words.
It's too long.
No,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, thanks so much for being a part of these conversations, Jenna.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care, and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.